In this video, we see our two learners performing a horizontal jump, where they take off and land on 2 feet. Jumping is a very complex movement, and so there are many things that we can focus on. To get ready for the jump, we see that Maddie lowers herself into a good ready position. It's almost like she's sitting in a chair, where she has her hips bent, her knees bent, and her ankles flexed, so that she is getting ready to explode out of all of those joints at the same time. She also has already started her arms swinging backwards, which she will then swing forwards to power herself through the jump. She also has her feet just far apart enough so that she is stable, but not any wider really than hip width apart. On the other hand, Mike doesn't really have much of a ready stance to speak of. He goes from standing straight up to bending all the way over at the hips. We can see that he's bent pretty much at a 90-degree angle at the hips. And he doesn't really bend his knees. There's a slight bend in the knees, but nothing even close to what Maddie has over here. And because of that, he's unable to really bend at the ankle. So already the power of the jump is going to be very compromised just from this ready position. He also doesn't swing his arms back really at all. If we take a look at when he gets ready for this jump, they're by his sides, and they stay by his sides all the way through when he's jumping. He attempts to thrust them forward during the jump, but it's far less effective than if he would have swung them back like Maddie did. When she swings them back and then forward. The 2 takeoffs. During the takeoff phase, we see that Maddie has gotten great extension from her hips, knees, and ankles. She makes herself nice and tall straight up through the motion. So if we go back, we see that she's loaded up and she's really pushed through the hips first, then the knees, then the ankles, powering through the jump. On the other hand, Mike's extension isn't too bad. He's trying to generate power from his hips and then from his knees and from his ankles. But if he had set himself up in a better ready position, this jump would have been much more effective. And that's why these movements are much more complex than, say, running or balancing, because all of these different phases of the jump affect one another in quite a big way. We see that at the height of his, right at the top of his takeoff here, he's actually got a pretty straight line here, and he's really got himself at an angle trying to generate as much distance as possible. Another positive that both of our jumpers have is that they're both, during the jump, are both looking ahead during the whole time. And that's important just so that you're not looking down at your feet and potentially you could lose balance or lose focus on where you want to jump. So if we look back, Maddie's looking forward the whole time, and Mike is also looking forward the whole time. And that extra bit of concentration just helps the jump in a developed learner. During their flight phase, we see that Maddie has a good extension on the jump, but Mike's extension is a little bit strange. He's got one foot way far ahead of the other one, and this usually indicates in developing learners that they're using one foot primarily to push off. It could indicate that they slipped, but it seems to show that they're using one of their feet a lot more than the other one, which could be an indicator of either a muscular imbalance or just not quite comfortable using both feet. And in any case, it's something that could and should be addressed. We see that during their flight, what you want to see during the flight is roughly a 45-degree angle. And so we can actually see that on the right, Mike's jump actually has more of an angle than Maddie's jump. And so while his Mechanics aren't as good. His flight path might be a little bit more effective, just because he's leaving the ground at this 45-degree angle and trying to power through that way. Whereas if we look at Maddie's jump, it's a little bit more straight up and down than Mike's, and so that could have some effect on what distance you're actually going to get. On the landing, we can see that Maddie's landing is excellent. She gets her feet back underneath her, and she fully absorbs the shock through her hips, her knees, and her ankles. And she keeps her arms out in front of her, so we can see that she brings her feet back in, and right there we see that she's fully extended to 90 degrees at her ankles, then at her knees, and she's got the 290 degrees in her ankles and her knees, and a good 45-degree angle roughly at her hips. And that is allowing her to absorb all the shock through all those joints. She's also got her arms straight out in front of her so that she can keep the forward momentum. And a sign of a developing learner when they're landing is that they'll often fall backwards, and that can be offset. The tendency to do that can be offset by keeping their hands out in front of them. All of these mechanics allow Maddie to be able to land successfully and stand straight up without losing any balance or needing to really regain any composure at all. For Mike's landing, well, he does the best he probably can with this kind of a flight path. He manages to get both his feet underneath him. One foot lands slightly before the other one, but it's there relatively quickly. And we can look at how so he's got the bend in the ankle somewhat. He doesn't have quite the 90-degree angle we want, and he has this really exaggerated degree angle at the hip, which is causing him to have this forward momentum that actually tips him forward at the end of the jump. He's got too much of an angle in his hips, and it's making his upper body fold forward and his arms come forward, and it makes him lose his balance at the end of the jump. The way that he used his arms for the jump really sacrifices the landing as well. He doesn't use them to gain any momentum, and so when they're out in front of his body, they're not swinging in really any general direction. They're kind of all over the place. And because of that, when he lands, they're not helping him keep his balance at all. One's off to the side, one is pointing straight down, and they're not really helping him like they did with Maddie. Maddie's arms were nice and controlled. She lands, and they're straight out in front of her and help her maintain balance, whereas Mike's aren't really doing him any favors. And a final thing about the landing is that when Mike lands, he's bending so far forward at the hips that his ankles aren't really able to get any flexion, and it really decreases the amount of shock they can absorb. That could be a possible flexibility issue where he can't really get any kind of a bend in the ankle because he's bent over at the hip, but that's something else we could look into. So our developed learner, Maddie, her jump is good, all except for maybe her flight path. And this could be addressed by just having something easy for her to jump over, like a skipping rope. And then as she's able to clear it on each jump, we could move it further away. This provides a good visual prompt for her to encourage more distance. And she might realize, of course with a little bit of explanation, she might realize that in order to get to, let's say, if the skipping rope was here, to get there, to clear it, she would really have to get that angle going. More of an angle on the jump. Really would have to get 45-degree angle and bring those feet way out in front to reach that. For Mike, the main thing we really want to correct here, and most of his problems stem from, is his lack of arm movement. There are other things, but that's the main one. So an easy way to correct this with developing learners is to just get them to practice their arm movements by maybe getting them to do a few pumps before they jump. So it would kind of be like a 1, 2, 3, except you'd want to see that arm movement back, much less of a bend at the hips and more at the knees and the ankles. and just get him to just practice that. Make sure he goes 1, 2, 3, and then jumps. And then if you see that he's not doing it right in the preparation, you can maybe step in and correct that. So we can see the full thing here. The 2 jumpers. Thank you.